The story begins with Ray, wounded and alone in a dark dungeon, struggling to stay alive. He had to heal himself quickly. He needed to prove his worth. Without wasting any time, he used heal on himself. Exil's Labyrinth was an SSS ranked dungeon, one of the 7 most difficult labyrinths in the world. These 7 labyrinths were unexplored, rumored to hold powerful secret treasures. A month ago, an adventurer group cleared an A-ranked dungeon, earning the right to challenge higher-ranked ones. Now they were inside Yggdrasil's labyrinth. Ray was part of this group, an A-ranked team called Gunkino Dongwa. Every member was highly skilled. A lizard man lunged at Ray, but before it could reach him, a powerful magic attack sent it flying. The spell came from their black mage, a descendant of the ancient witch File. Their enchanter wielded 2 swords infused with lightning and wind magic. She was known as the Sword Saintess, Himeno. Another member, a towering warrior with immense strength, stood as their team's defender, the greatsword warrior, Suglinst. Nearby, a mage completed his spell, engulfing the monsters in flames. This was their leader, Loki, a genius in magic, combat, and strategy. And then there was Ray, their white mage, the team's healer, doing his best to keep everyone alive. After the battle, Suglinst called Ray over to heal Himeno. She insisted it was just a scratch but wanted to be sure. Ray used his magic to heal her wounds. However, he had a serious weakness as a white mage. Right after healing, he collapsed. Annoyed, Himeno kicked him in the face and called him disgusting. She couldn't believe her day was getting worse. Loki went over to check on Ray and gave him a potion to recover from exhaustion. He helped Ray drink it. Ray apologized for wasting such a valuable item on himself. When he looked around, he noticed the others staring at him with disgust. Loki told him to ignore them and advised him to rest until he could move again. Ray had a major flaw as a healer. His magic power was extremely low. Using heal even once drained all his energy, leaving him completely unable to move. Since his healing was so limited, it made the team's battle strategies much harder to plan. Compared to his teammates, who were strong fighters, he felt useless. Yet despite this, Loki invited him to join the party. Ray didn't understand why. Once he regained his strength, he rejoined the team. Even with his doubts, he was grateful to Loki for choosing him. He felt like he finally had a place where he belonged. However, the others still saw him as a burden. Loki then reminded everyone of their goal, the lowest floor of the dungeon. He was determined for their party to be the first to conquer Yggdrasil's labyrinth and claim the secret treasure. The team assumed it would be no harder than an A-ranked dungeon. Ray silently vowed to do his best and not slow them down. But none of them knew the true horror that awaited in the S-ranked dungeon. On the 125th floor, Suglin lashed out, complaining about the monsters they had faced. They were as strong as S-rank creatures, far more powerful than what they had encountered before. Until now, they had only fought A-ranked monsters, but the difference between the two was like night and day. Loki hadn't expected them to be this strong either. The sudden challenge had put everyone on edge. Himeno cried out in fear, not wanting to die. File wondered why such powerful monsters only appeared on the 125th floor. No one spoke after that. The weight of their situation pressed down on them. Ray stayed silent, knowing that if he said anything, the others, already under extreme stress, might take their frustration out on him. Suglinst finally suggested going back, unwilling to face those monsters again. Himeno quickly agreed but pointed out the real problem. How could they return? Ray had also noticed that their progress had been smooth until this floor, but now they were stuck. There was no way back with just their own strength. They needed a special method to escape. Loki then brought up an idea, using the stone. Suglinst immediately knew what he meant. It was the one they had found at the lowest floor of an A-ranked dungeon. Himeno and File agreed that it was their best chance. Ray called it the teleport stone, a rare item that could instantly transport the user to any location, but it could only be used once. Loki opened a small box and confirmed that they had 5 of them, just enough for the whole team. Ray recalled how valuable each one was. If sold, they would be worth thousands of gold coins, but in a moment like this, there was no question. When it came to choosing between money and life, life was always the right choice. Loki suddenly announced that it was time. Ray wasn't sure what he meant, but he watched as the others moved forward with him. He assumed they planned to cover as much ground as possible before escaping. It was expected from the guild's greatest genius, and Ray couldn't help but admire Loki. But then, Loki turned to Ray and told him he was being banished from the team. Ray froze in shock, his legs giving out beneath him. His mind raced, trying to understand what Loki meant. Before he could ask, Loki questioned why he was spacing out and if he had even heard what was said. Ray quickly confirmed that he had, just as a stone flew straight at his face. Suglin scoffed, asking if they really needed to explain it to him. Himeno then pressed her heel down on Ray's hand, calling him slow and disgusting. She accused him of being a pervert, always staring at her during battles. When Ray tried to lift his head, she kicked him in the face, accusing him of trying to look under her skirt. Ray protested, saying he only watched everyone closely so he could react quickly if someone needed healing. But no one believed him. Their faces were filled with disgust. Even File looked away, refusing to say anything. Then Loki made things clear. Someone at Ray's level couldn't support them against stronger monsters. He was a burden because of his weakness. Ray couldn't deny that, but he reminded them that he helped in other ways, analyzing enemies, finding weaknesses, gathering dungeon information, cooking, and even handling all the chores so their travels were more comfortable. Loki sighed and told Ray that he didn't understand the expectations placed on their team. He reminded him that they were supposed to defeat the demon lord who threatened the world, and even the king had high hopes for them. If someone as weak as Ray stayed with them, they had no future. Ray admitted that he didn't have the same strength as the others, but he couldn't understand why Loki had chosen him in the first place. When he was 11, he had been a slave, and Loki was the one who took him in. Gathering his courage, Ray asked Loki why he had chosen him. He just wanted to know his worth and where he truly belonged. Loki scoffed and called him foolish for not realizing it. He explained that he had only wanted a cheap slave who could heal. Back then, he had been a poor E-rank adventurer and would have taken anyone as long as they were inexpensive and a white mage. Now, he regretted that choice and hoped he would never end up with someone as useless as Ray again. This time, he planned to find a proper white mage. Since their team was already full of A-ranked adventurers, anyone would be a better fit. It finally sank in. Ray was being abandoned. And worse, he was being left behind in the deepest level of an SSS-ranked dungeon filled with terrifying monsters. Loki didn't even want to waste an expensive teleport stone on him. He had found the perfect place to get rid of Ray. Ray didn't want to believe it. He didn't want to die. Desperate, he begged Loki for mercy and a chance to prove himself. Loki agreed, but instead of helping, he stabbed Ray and ordered him to heal his own wound. Pain shot through Ray's body as he screamed. Loki smirked and told him to heal himself or die. Himeno and Suglins burst into laughter, amused by Loki's cruelty. Ray felt like his body was about to give out, but he forced himself to move. With trembling hands, he grabbed the dagger and pulled it out. Blood poured from the wound, but he pressed his palm against it and used heal. Slowly, his flesh mended until there wasn't even a scar left. Loki watched with interest. He admitted that Ray's healing speed was impressive, but that was the only thing worthwhile about him. Ray refused to give up. He wouldn't fall here. The others stared in shock as he pushed himself back to his feet. Loki too was surprised. Normally Ray would collapse after using heal, but this time he stood strong. Ray asked if he had proven himself enough. Loki laughed and said he was only joking. Without warning, he punched Ray and knocked him down again. He scoffed, saying Ray wasn't even worth using a teleport stone on. This was a perfect chance to get rid of him. As a final insult, Loki left behind the dagger he had used to stab Ray, claiming he could use it to defend himself. Suglinst found it amusing that Ray had to survive on his own now. Himeno wondered if this dungeon would become his grave. Without another word, they activated their teleport stones and vanished. Ray sat there, gripping the dagger tightly. He thought about everything he had endured, every moment of pain, every humiliation, just to protect the only place he called home. And yet Loki had discarded him as if he were nothing. Suddenly a monster appeared. Ray tried to move, but his body was still weak. Worse, he was trapped near the edge of a steep cliff. He let out a bitter laugh. Was this really his fate? His family had been killed by monsters. He had been enslaved. He had been nothing more than a punching bag for his team. Had his life ever meant anything at all? Before he could find an answer, the monster attacked. Its massive blow sent Ray flying backward. The force knocked him off the cliff. As he plummeted toward the water below, he heard a voice. Someone called himself pitiful. The words echoed in his mind. He had heard that voice before, but where? Then everything went dark. Ray slowly regained consciousness, his mind still hazy. As he opened his eyes, he saw a smug-looking girl standing in front of him. Confused, he stared at her, wondering why a girl was in the dungeon. The girl seemed amused and even joked that she was, in fact, just a girl. She noticed Ray staring at her and assumed he was captivated by her cuteness. Ray admitted she was cute, but that was the least of his concerns. The girl, however, blushed and playfully asked for more compliments. Shaking off his confusion, Ray focused on the situation. He asked why she was in the dungeon and what floor they were on. The girl told him to calm down, saying she could answer his second question, but not the first. She then revealed they were on the 200th floor, the very bottom of Yggdrasil's labyrinth. Ray was shocked. He couldn't understand how he ended up at the lowest level and wondered if escaping was even possible. Seeing his panic, the girl asked if he wanted to leave. She confidently claimed he could do so any time since he had already obtained the secret treasure. Still confused, Ray asked what she meant. The girl explained that he had gained Yggdrasil's secret treasure and asked if he could feel its aura. She then pointed out that he had been cursed by Yggdrasil, with his rotten left eye as proof. Ray asked what she meant by cursed. The girl explained that his magic circuit was now linked to Yggdrasil, which essentially granted him unlimited magic power. How he used that power was up to him. but with it, escaping the dungeon was completely possible. After hearing this, Ray asked who the girl was. She introduced herself as Norn. The name sounded familiar to him, but he couldn't remember why. Noticing his confusion, Norn saw that he looked like a white mage and suggested he use heal on himself. Ray hesitated, admitting that he could use the spell but seemed afraid to do so. Norn asked what was wrong, and he explained that casting heal once completely drained his energy. Norn gently patted his head and told him to try it anyway. Ray cast heal on himself, and to his surprise, he didn't feel tired at all. His magic power remained untouched. Norn then asked if he could feel his body overflowing with magic. She explained that this was Yggdrasil's magic power. As she had mentioned earlier, Ray's magic circuit was now connected to Yggdrasil. Normally, magic power flowed from the core of a magic circuit, which acted as a gateway. This core couldn't be easily restored with heal. However, when Ray had been swept away and ended up on the lowest level, he had received Yggdrasil's curse. This caused his magic core to shift from his left eye to Yggdrasil itself. Realizing this, Ray finally understood that he could now cast magic without worrying about running out of energy. Norn confirmed that he basically had unlimited magic power. However, Ray still didn't understand why he had been connected to Yggdrasil in the first place. Norn asked if he was curious. Ray admitted that he was. This was his own body after all, and he wanted to know more about the so-called curse he had received. Norn explained that the spring was the reason why this had happened to Ray. She said she had found him floating in the water and pulled him out. While being swept away, he had accidentally swallowed some of the spring water. She then revealed that the secret treasure was actually the spring itself, known as the World Tree's Tears. It was said that this water could even bring the dead back to life. The tree Ray had been leaning against was none other than the World Tree itself, the one that had formed the dungeon. He was stunned to see it with his own eyes, especially in the lowest level of an SSS-ranked dungeon, a place no adventurer had ever reached. But what shocked him even more was the realization that the secret treasure was spring water that granted unlimited magic power. Seeing it and having access to it felt unbelievable. Meanwhile, Norn was thrilled to learn that her garden was actually considered as an SSS-ranked dungeon. Ray had already figured out his current situation, but now he was curious about Norn. However, he remembered that she had avoided explaining why she was inside the dungeon in the first place. Still, he asked her why she was alone and if she had been surviving there all this time by herself. Norn confidently stated that she was much stronger than he thought. Ray agreed that age had nothing to do with strength, but it was still surprising since she looked no older than 12, and dungeons usually had age restrictions. When Norn asked if he was doubting her, she claimed she could easily defeat S-ranked monsters on her own. Ray found that hard to believe since even his A-ranked party had stood no chance against them. Norn admitted that her appearance might seem unreliable, but putting that aside, she asked if Ray wanted to leave the dungeon. Ray looked up, deep in thought. To escape, he would have to defeat S-ranked monsters, something he wasn't sure he could do. Even with unlimited magic power, he was still a white mage, a non-combatant. He had no idea how to make it out on his own, and even if he did escape, what would he do? His party had already banished him. He had nowhere to return to. He had nothing left. For a moment, he considered staying in the dungeon forever. Maybe he could find some form of peace here, living in the depths until the end of his life. He could no longer save anyone. With that thought in mind, he turned to Norn and asked if he could stay in the lowest levels of the dungeon. Norn had said Ray could stay, but she was surprised by his request. He told her he wanted to stay for a while, which confused her since he had been so eager to leave before. Picking up his knife, Ray explained that he had changed his mind. If Norn didn't mind, he wanted to live in the area too, and asked what she ate down there. Norn was surprised at how quickly Ray's thoughts had shifted. However, she told him that eating wasn't necessary in this place. Magic constantly provided their bodies with nourishment, keeping them alive even without food. Even minor injuries healed instantly. Because of this, Ray was now very close to being immortal. Ray couldn't believe it, he had become nearly immortal. But Norn warned him that nearly didn't mean invincible. If he were beheaded, that would be the end of him. She considered asking him to use heal on himself, but his body had already recovered on its own. Since Ray planned to live there, Norn assumed he would naturally learn more over time. She also pointed out how weak he currently was. If he left the area as he was now, he would become nothing more than food for monsters. She told him he had to get stronger to survive because monsters still roamed below. Ray suddenly realized he wasn't in a safe place at all. Determined, he swore to do his best. Norn decided to start teaching him the basics. Ray didn't know how strong she was, but he made up his mind. He would become strong enough not to be a burden. He never wanted to feel weak again. From that moment, he resolved to grow stronger. 3 years later, on the 180th floor, Ray stood tense, gripping his knife. The ground suddenly cracked open and a massive snake-like monster emerged. As it lunged, Ray blocked its attack, but the creature swung the sharp blade on its tail to strike again. Ray quickly channeled magic power into himself and his knife, then swung with all his strength. His blade cut through the monster's tail, severing the bladed tip. The snake let out a piercing shriek and tried to counter, but before it could, Ray had already reached its head. With a swift motion, he drove his knife deep into the creature. In its final moments, the snake glared at Ray, but he remained unfazed. He simply pressed his knife in deeper, pouring magic power into the monster. In an instant, its head burst into a fountain of blood. The massive creature collapsed with a heavy thud, lifeless. Ray took a deep breath, relieved that the battle was over. He called for Norn, who approached with a proud expression. She observed him for a moment, then remarked on how much he had changed. Defeating the 180th floor's boss monster, the Shadow Viper, was no small feat, and she was clearly impressed. Ray explained that he had strengthened both his body and knife using Yggdrasil's magic power. He then transferred that power into the monster's body through the knife. Norn was pleased to see that Ray had improved in controlling his magic, especially compared to when he first started. Ray, however, preferred not to think about those early days. Norn remembered a time when Ray had been killed by a small monster similar to an arc rabbit. Despite its cute appearance, the rabbit was an S-ranked monster. If not for the secret treasure, Ray would not have survived. His ability to grow stronger was entirely due to Yggdrasil's magic, which gave him unlimited healing. His half-immortal body also allowed him to experiment repeatedly, improving his accuracy in using magic. Over time, his healing abilities became more efficient. Each time he adjusted his magic circuit, he could even restore the eye he had once lost. Norn admitted that even under her guidance, she had expected Ray to take 100 years to reach his current strength. Yet it had only taken him 3 years. She called him a monster himself. Ray, however, insisted that it was simply because Norn was a good teacher. Norn thanked him but told him not to be too modest. Despite this, Ray's younger self still believed he was weak. He suddenly turned to look behind him. Norn noticed and asked if he was seeing another illusion. Since arriving in the dungeon, Ray had occasionally seen a child version of himself. Norn suspected it was a side effect of his connection with Exile. As the Tree of Life, Exile accumulated and created all living things, and it might also be trying to absorb Ray's life. Ray could feel it. Every time he was on the verge of death, something was pulling at him. Norn couldn't say for sure, but she wondered if the magic flowing through his body carried traces of the dead. She warned him not to let it consume him. Ray nodded and tightened his grip on his chest. Ray and Norn soon had a sparring session. As they fought, Ray mentioned that 3 years had already passed. Norn noticed something was on his mind and asked if he was starting to miss the outside world. She also called him cute, but Ray quickly denied it. He explained that he wasn't thinking about the outside world. He was thinking about the time he had spent with her. It had gone by in an instant. He had been too focused on surviving to even notice. Back then, time felt like it had stopped. But now, it was moving too fast. He had died too many times, but he had finally become strong enough to survive in the dungeon. Just then, Norn tripped, causing her skirt to flip. Ray quickly looked away. Norn, noticing this, glared at him and kicked him, warning him not to look away during a fight. Ray rolled on the ground in pain as Norn remarked that she thought he had grown, but he was still just as naive. Ray, still recovering, thought that any man would have looked away in that moment. That night, the two sat together, gazing at the stars. They remained silent for a while until Ray finally asked if Norn had always been alone. She was surprised by the question, but then explained that very few people ever entered the dungeon. More importantly, ordinary humans wouldn't even be able to reach the lower levels. Ray agreed, remembering his battle against the Shadow Viper. He had died countless times before he could finally defeat it. No matter how much magic power someone had, facing an SSS-ranked monster like that would almost always mean death on the first encounter. Ray wondered if Norn had ever thought about leaving. Norn simply said she couldn't leave the dungeon. If she could, she would have done so a long time ago since she was strong enough. Ray thought she might have stayed because she liked the quiet, and Norn agreed. But that wasn't the only reason she remained. She didn't explain further, and Ray stopped asking. Even so, Norn was curious about the world outside. She then asked Ray if he still wanted to return, as she assumed he had something left to do. Ray looked up at the stars, lost in thought. He was no longer connected to Gunkinodongwa, and he couldn't see himself going back. All that remained were lingering feelings of hatred and frustration. He questioned what else was left for him, and why he had even wished for death in the first place. Then Norn asked if there was someone outside the dungeon he truly wanted to see. Ray hesitated before recalling a woman. A realization struck him and he suddenly stood up, startling Norn. At that moment, he understood. There was still something he needed to do. He made up his mind to leave the dungeon. Ray once knew a red-haired woman named Nenemoa before he joined Gunkinodongwa. She was a fellow slave. Ray stayed close to Nene, treating her like an older sister. Whenever the slave traders hurt him, Nene stepped in to protect him. She had promised to keep him safe, but in return, she asked that if she ever found herself in danger, he would be the one to save her. But Ray was destined to be sold, and he knew he couldn't keep that promise. Nene knew it too. She had always been there for him, offering kindness and warmth when no one else did. Even after escaping slavery and becoming an adventurer, he still hadn't repaid her. However, this time he believed he finally could. With the power he now possessed, he planned to find her and rescue her. If his magic could help, then maybe he could free Nini from whatever burden she carried. 5 months later, Ray made his way toward the labyrinth's exit with Norn's help. As he looked around, something felt familiar. Noticing his hesitation, Norn asked what was wrong. Ray said the place looked familiar and asked where they were. Norn told him they had reached the 125th floor. Ray realized they still had a long way to go before reaching the exit. Thanks to Exile's magic, he didn't feel physically exhausted, but the journey was wearing on his mind. Norn reminded him that at best it would take another 2 years to make it out. For the past 5 months, the two had focused only on reaching the exit, but most of the battles along the way had been fought by Ray. Norn claimed it was part of his training, but in reality, she just enjoyed watching him struggle. However, she always stepped in when he was in serious danger. She couldn't help but laugh when Ray was drenched in monster saliva back on the 160th floor. Ray, on the other hand, wished she had helped him, but Norn insisted that it was no longer training and that she was only laughing because Ray had become much stronger. She also found it amusing how desperately he tried to wash his clothes, embarrassed when she caught him half-dressed. Just as Ray was about to ask her something serious, Norn suddenly spotted a bag and rushed toward it, hoping to find clothes for him. Now that she mentioned it, Ray finally realized he was still covered in monster blood and saliva. Ray suddenly recognized the bag. It was his from years ago. Norn called it a miracle. As he looked at it, he remembered Loki taking it away with him. That was when he realized why this place felt familiar. It was the same spot where he had fallen before. Norn rummaged through the bag and frowned. There were no spare clothes, only food. Frustrated, she complained that they had underestimated Exile's labyrinth. Ray had no response. He couldn't argue with her. Just then, he sensed something nearby. A monster stepped forward, the same turtle-like creature that had pushed him off the cliff. Without hesitation, Ray took the opportunity to strike first. He leaped above the monster and slashed at it, declaring that he was no longer the same as before. However, the attack barely left a mark. He quickly realized that this creature was even tougher than the Shadow Viper, but when he noticed its severed tail, it became clear. The shell was the hardest part. The monster charged at him, ramming him into the wall, but Ray braced himself and stopped its attack with sheer strength. Taking a deep breath, he shifted his weight and flipped the massive creature over, using a technique similar to a judo athlete's throw. The monster crashed onto its back, slamming into the door. It groaned in pain as Ray stood over it, gripping his knife, now glowing with magic. Without hesitation, he struck the final blow. Ray stood over the monster's severed head, then turned to Norn and asked if he had done well. Instead of answering directly, Norn simply told him to make some friends once he got outside. Ray was caught off guard and asked why she had brought that up so suddenly. Norn pointed out how reckless he was and said that because of that he needed trustworthy friends. Ray didn't understand. He wasn't even sure about making friends. But Norn was confident he could do it. He couldn't believe how casually she said it. She reminded him that people couldn't live alone and that he had a long life ahead of him. She wanted him to have friends so that if she was ever gone, he would have someone to laugh with. Flustered, Ray asked her not to say such things. Norn stayed silent, simply watching him. In that moment, Ray realized what she was trying to tell him. He finally understood. With a determined nod, he promised to do his best. Norn smiled and called him a good boy. Ray couldn't help but smile back, though he complained about being treated like a child again. Norn just laughed and said that to her he was still a kid. Then, with excitement, she told him they should keep going. Ray watched her for a moment, still smiling. If he did make some friends, he wanted to introduce them to her. He also wanted her to meet Nain. No matter what, he swore he would return to the labyrinth once he was done with his business outside. The two continued their journey, traveling through towering cliffs and mining areas. Eventually, they reached a forest. At one point, Norn stepped on a weak tree branch which snapped beneath her. She lost her balance and fell, landing right on Ray's face. Embarrassed and annoyed, she immediately chased after him as if it were his fault. Despite the mishap, they both laughed and enjoyed each other's company as they camped and moved forward. The time had finally come. Ray and Norn reached the exit of the labyrinth. Ray could see that their journey together was about to end. Norn, having guided him this far, said her job was done. Though she was immortal, she still wished for Ray to be careful in the world outside. Ray hesitated for a moment. Noticing this, Norn asked what was wrong. He then asked if she truly couldn't come with him. Norn sighed and explained that he must have already realized the truth. After all, he was a white mage. Her body wasn't real. It had been created from the dungeon's aura, a vessel of pure magic. In reality, she had died long ago. If she left the labyrinth, her body would vanish. That was why they had to part ways. Ray felt guilty for making her say it out loud. He apologized, but Norn scolded him for looking so sad, saying it felt like he was making her the bad guy. He apologized again and she reassured him. As long as he understood, that was enough for her. Then, with some hesitation, she asked if he could visit her from time to time. Otherwise, she would feel lonely. Ray was surprised by her sudden honesty. Smiling, he promised not to let her feel lonely. After all, he had grown to love the labyrinth like a home. He vowed to return. Norn made him swear, and Ray promised again. He even mentioned that if he made friends in the outside world, he would bring them to meet her. Norn playfully said she wouldn't mind if one of them was a girlfriend. More than anything, she wanted him to enjoy life outside and not just focus on his goals. Ray assured her he would, then turned to leave. As he stepped forward, Norn reminded him to be careful. He waved goodbye and walked out of the labyrinth, the place where he had been trapped for 3 years at the bottom level and spent another 2 years reaching the exit. Now, standing at the edge of the outside world, he couldn't help but wonder, had the world changed while he was gone? The thought made him anxious, but at the same time, excitement filled his heart. Ray finally stepped into the outside world and took in the scenery. Tears ran down his face as he saw the real sky for the first time. His body trembled with excitement. When he turned around, he noticed that the exit had vanished. He quickly realized he would have to return through the original entrance. Grateful to Norn, he took a deep breath, slapped his cheeks to focus, and decided to find a village or town where he could trade his belongings for money. He also needed a new set of clothes. Suddenly, a strange smell filled the air. At first, he wondered if it was coming from him, but it wasn't. The scent was familiar. He recognized it as the smell of blood, both human and monster. Not far away, a holy knight stood frozen as he watched his partner's body split in half, blood gushing like a fountain. The upper half of the body lay motionless on the ground. In front of him stood a towering humanoid monster. Beside the monster, wolf-like creatures covered in dark, murky shadows waited, their presence adding to the knight's growing fear. The creature spoke, saying it had received orders from its superiors to devour as many humans as possible. Some time ago, a powerful figure stood before an army of monsters and ordered them to destroy the capital. This person believed that weak creatures were useless and that demons were the strongest. Following their command, the monsters prepared for an invasion. Raid after raid, they attacked travelers and merchants, stealing supplies. They killed and ate humans repeatedly, yet it was never enough. They still lacked the resources needed to take down the capital. To prove their superiority, the demons had to keep killing and consuming more humans. Among them, a lizard man particularly enjoyed the violence and destruction. This time, he targeted a carriage carrying holy knights. His wolf followers devoured the horses while he struck down one of the knights. The remaining knight, trembling in fear, finally recognized the lizard man standing before him. The single brown horn and massive war axe made it clear. This was Vegan, the B-ranked human hunter. Vegan felt pleased by his growing reputation. As he had expected, the knight's equipment was of high quality, filled with strong magic. He flipped the carriage over, causing a girl inside to scream. His eyes then landed on a chained woman. She was valuable in many ways. However, he hadn't expected the carriage to carry only 3 people, 2 holy knights and a single slave. Given how frequently he had been attacking, he had assumed there would be more guards. The holy knight took off running. He had no other choice. Vegan was strong enough to cut a person down with a single swing. As the knight fled, Vegan remembered that holy knights were an official unit recognized by their king. The knight's goal was clear. He needed to inform his superiors. Vegan scoffed at the idea of an elite warrior showing his back to an enemy. Without hesitation, he threw his axe. It struck the fleeing knight, killing him instantly. Disappointed, Vegan wondered if these so-called holy knights were nothing more than decorations. He turned to the woman nearby and asked if she thought the same. She trembled as he stepped toward her. He muttered that humans didn't taste good, so the demon wolves could have the knights' bodies. But the woman, she was different. To him, she looked delicious. Her face and eyes were particularly pleasing to him. He decided to keep her as a pet for a while before eating her. Her terrified expression excited him. He liked the idea of her living with the fear of knowing her fate. With a grin, he recalled how many women had begged for their lives, promising to do anything if he spared them. Humans fascinated him. They were willing to betray everything just to survive. Behind him, the wolves feasted on the fallen knights. Watching them, Vegan admitted he loved seeing the moment when humans realized they had been betrayed, when hope turned to despair. He could never get enough of it. The woman sobbed and pleaded for her life. Vegan only laughed. He promised to take care of her until the day her cries of "please spare me" turned into "please kill me." Just then, Ray stepped out of the nearby bushes and greeted them. Both Vegan and the girl were confused. Ray apologized for disturbing them and said he was lost. He asked if the girl could help him find a nearby village. Vegan simply replied that she couldn't. Ray chuckled, as if he had already expected that answer. Vegan wondered when this man had even gotten close to them. Despite Ray's worn-out clothes, Vegan's sharp senses noticed something alarming. Ray was covered in monster blood, and not just a little, but an unbelievable amount. Vegan couldn't help but wonder who this man really was. The girl suddenly told Ray to run away, warning that he would be killed too. Ray then asked if she didn't want to escape as well. She insisted that Vegan was after her and urged him to leave quickly. At that moment, Ray seemed to finally understand what was going on. Vegan glared at Ray, who had an aloof expression. He didn't know why Ray was covered in different monster blood, but he couldn't let any witnesses live. An idea came to him. He would let Ray run, then strike him from behind. After that, he would cut off Ray's legs without killing him. Once Ray was helpless, he would force the girl to watch as he cut up what was left of him. He imagined the look on her face when the person she tried to save was killed in front of her. The thought excited him. Vegan agreed to let Ray escape, but the girl would stay. He wanted to see what Ray would choose. Would he run away alone or try to save her? He hoped to see a look of pain on Ray's face, but instead, Ray simply walked away. Vegan was confused. Was Ray really going to abandon her just like that? Still, it didn't matter. If he couldn't enjoy Ray's suffering, then he would enjoy the girl's. He threw his war axe at Ray and the girl shouted a warning, but Vegan claimed it was too late. Ray's limbs were severed and the girl's face twisted in despair. This was exactly what Vegan wanted. The girl screamed as Ray's body parts scattered. She called Vegan cruel for what he had done. Seeing her in despair made Vegan excited. This was the reaction he wanted, and he couldn't get enough of it. He walked toward Ray and tried to pick up his body, wondering what kind of expression Ray had in his final moments. At that moment, Vegan's head was suddenly cut off. He saw the world upside down and questioned if his head had really been severed. But a second later, his head reattached to his body. He was confused. There was no pain at all. Ray calmly explained that it was because he had cut his neck so cleanly. Shocked, Vegan asked why Ray's legs were still intact. He was sure he had cut them off. He demanded to know what Ray had done to him. Ray casually explained that he had cut off Vegan's head and then reattached it using heal. Vegan was stunned. He had never heard of such powerful healing magic before, and if something like that existed, it wouldn't just be called a simple heal. Facing an unknown power beyond his understanding, he realized one thing: the man standing before him was dangerous. He had to escape or he would die. Ray asked what was wrong, but Vegan's instincts screamed that Ray was a threat, yet his legs wouldn't move. He then remembered his superior's order: to devour all humans and prove that demons were the stronger race. However, another thought struck him. Even if he ran, the 4 deadly demons would kill him for failing. Determined, he chose to fight. Gripping his war axe, he charged at Ray, declaring himself the great human hunter who wouldn't be defeated by a mere child. With confidence, he swung his weapon. He was Vegan, the one who had destroyed 3 human villages and slain several holy knights from the capital. But in an instant, Ray overpowered him. With little effort, Ray slashed off his right arm. Then, in a calm voice, Ray asked if Vegan finally understood. He was weaker. Overwhelmed by fear, Vegan turned and ran with all his strength, his severed arm left behind. He had been wrong. Ray then declared that he would forgive Vegan this time, but there wouldn't be a second chance. Vegan had always believed he was the strong one, the hunter of the weak. But now, as Ray warned him never to appear before him again, Vegan realized the truth: he was the weak one. And this time, he was the prey. After the fight, Ray checked on the girl to see if she was okay. She introduced herself as Lyanna, a slave, and thanked him for saving her. However, she seemed more worried about Ray and looked at his legs. She couldn't believe they had really healed, especially after seeing them get cut off. Ray was surprised that Lyanna was concerned about him when she had been the one in danger. He told her that he was a white mage. Lyanna was shocked and asked if he had really just used heal on his severed legs and restored them instantly. She wondered why she had never heard of such a powerful white mage before. At that moment, Ray realized he had made a mistake. He had been healing like this every day for the past 5 years without thinking much about it. He knew his heal was far from normal. To avoid more questions, he quickly changed the subject and asked Lyanna what she planned to do next. Lyanna admitted she wasn't sure. As Ray looked at her, he saw himself in her. He remembered how weak he had been in the past, unable to do anything, with Nenemoa always there to support him. He couldn't just leave a 12-year-old girl alone with nowhere to go. If Nenemoa were with him, she would have helped without hesitation. Ray said he was also looking for a destination and planned to go to the capital. He reached out his hand to Lyanna and asked her to join him. He mentioned that there would be many things to see and good food to eat. Ray wanted to be like Nenemoa, someone who helped others in need. He felt that this could be his chance, starting with Lyanna. However, it would be a while before he could see Nenemoa again. Meanwhile, in a dark and eerie room, a hooded man opened a capsule. A girl with horns emerged, crawling weakly on the floor. She let out a single groan before dying. The hooded man stared in disbelief. Another failure. He still couldn't perfect the method, but it didn't bother him. He had plenty of materials left. Next in line for the experiment was Nenemoa. Ray asked Lyanna if she wanted to go with him to the royal capital, but she was too shocked to respond. Later, Ray prayed in front of the graves he had made for the fallen holy knights. Since it was getting dark, he decided they should travel as far as possible before nightfall. He also took a new set of clothes from the wrecked carriage, though he felt guilty for taking them without permission. However, he had no choice. He couldn't enter the royal capital wearing torn clothes. To make up for it, he left some minerals he had found in the dungeon as payment. Lyanna then called out to Ray in a formal tone. She apologized and said she couldn't go with him. When Ray asked why, she explained that she was afraid Vegan might come after them again if she stayed with him. Ray realized she was talking about the demon from earlier. He admitted that he hadn't caught Vegan, but he was sure he had scared him enough. He believed Vegan wouldn't dare attack them again. Ray then reassured Lyanna that if Vegan ever returned, he would simply kill him. Lyanna was startled by his words, and Ray quickly told her to forget what he said. Ray assured Lyanna not to worry because she was no longer a slave and could live a normal life. However, Lyanna doubted that since her temporary master had just died. She then revealed her slave mark, proof that she would always remain a slave. By channeling magic into the mark, a master could force their slave to obey any command. It was basically a magic curse. Ray couldn't believe he hadn't thought this through. As a slave with an unknown origin, Lyanna wouldn't be able to find a new master. No one would take in an unregistered slave since they could be punished for the slave's actions. Ray remembered that ownerless slaves usually face terrible fates, either becoming food for demons or beasts, being forced into prostitution, or even taking their own lives. However, Ray also remembered how Lyanna had warned him to run away. Even when her own life was in danger, she chose to protect him instead. The reason she refused to go with him might have been because she feared the dangers that would come with staying by his side. If Nenemoa had been with him, Ray was sure she wouldn't have backed down so easily. If she had the power to save people, she would have reached out without hesitation. Ray knew there was only one thing he could do for Lyanna. He suggested forming a contract with him. Lyanna was surprised but reminded him that her master had already died, meaning they couldn't go through the formal procedure. She also worried that Ray might get punished for it. But Ray told her not to worry. He understood the risks. Then he removed the magic on his hand, revealing his own slave mark. Lyanna was surprised to see a mark on Ray. He then explained that he hated seeing it, so he always covered it with medicine. Now, he needed to cover it again. Lyanna asked if he had already become a slave, but Ray told her that he had been abandoned, so there was nothing to worry about being with him. Lyanna tried to argue, but before she could say more, Ray noticed something. He quickly turned around and slashed a demon wolf. Looking closer, he realized it was the same kind of monster that Vegan had brought, and many more were still left behind. As the monsters charged toward them, Ray told Lyanna to stay behind him. The creatures attacked as a group. Ray focused his magic power into his leg and released it all at once by kicking the ground. Earth spikes shot up, throwing the monsters back. He followed up with a single slash, cutting off 3 heads at once. Then he warned the remaining monsters that they wouldn't get past him. Watching Ray fight, Lyanna realized he was no ordinary healer. As she looked around, she spotted a sword. Meanwhile, Ray was complaining about how many monsters there were. One tried to sneak up on him from behind. Just like he had done to Vegan, Ray planned to make them feel fear. However, before he could act, he heard Lyanna shouting, breaking his focus. Lyanna swiftly cut the monster, attacking Ray in half like butter. Ray stood in shock, unable to speak. As Lyanna saw the monster dead and caught her breath, relief washed over her. She had done it. Though her hands trembled, she offered to fight alongside Ray. Ray, confused, asked what she was trying to do. Lyanna reassured him, saying she had been trained to use a sword, even though this was her first real battle. Ray was surprised to learn that Lyanna had been trained. From what he knew, slaves were usually only used for chores and heavy labor. A lot must have changed in the past 5 years. However, there was a problem. Several monsters lunged at Lyanna, who was taken aback, but Ray quickly reacted, slicing them apart and protecting her in his arms. The sheer number of enemies was too much for Lyanna to handle. Ray then fixed his gaze on the remaining monsters and realized that the number was too much for Lyanna. Ray then released his intimidating aura. Dark, ghostly figures loomed behind him, causing the monsters to tremble in fear. Unable to withstand the pressure, the monsters all fled with tails between their legs. Ray let out a sigh of relief and told Lyanna that it was over. However, Lyanna didn't move. Instead, she blushed and leaned on Ray for support. It was only then that Ray realized he was holding her tight on his chest. Embarrassed, he quickly let go and apologized. Lyanna thanked him for saving her again. As Ray looked at her, he noticed something. Lyanna fought recklessly as if she didn't care about her own life. He could tell she thought she was a burden to him. Deciding to keep her close, Ray came up with an excuse. He claimed he had lost his memories of the past several years. Of course, it was a lie. It would have been too much trouble to explain that he had been trapped in a dungeon for 5 years, and those things would just confuse Lyanna. Pretending to be clueless about recent events, Ray asked Lyanna to teach him everything she knew. More specifically, he wanted information about Nenemoa. To learn that, he needed to understand what had happened over the past 5 years. In exchange for her help, he promised to protect her and even pay her. Lyanna hesitated and asked why he would go that far. Ray simply replied that he needed her, nothing more, nothing less. Lyanna was surprised to hear that she was needed. She thought about it for a moment. She admitted that she would have died without Ray's help, and if he was fine with that understanding, she would go with him. Ray felt relieved and thanked her. Embarrassed, Lyanna said that she should have been the one to say those words. She then held out her hand showing the slave mark, and Ray proceeded with the contract. Once it was completed, Lyanna started addressing Ray formally. However, Ray quickly refused to be treated that way. Ray didn't form the contract to become Lyanna's master. He had two reasons for doing it. First, it allowed them to know each other's location at all times. If Lyanna was ever in danger, Ray could immediately find her. Second, they could share and control magic power together. Ray could strengthen Lyanna's body with his aura, making it easier for him to protect her. Lyanna asked Ray to call her name casually. Ray requested the same, but Lyanna still insisted on speaking formally. Feeling awkward, Ray urged her to relax and speak normally. As the sun began to set, they decided to stop and set up camp. Lyanna said she could keep walking, but Ray didn't want her to push herself too hard. However, they were still in a forest where monsters roamed. Lyanna apologized for making him camp there, but Ray didn't mind since he was also tired. He set up a tent from the carriage and told Lyanna to rest inside. She didn't argue, and Ray felt relieved. As Ray lit the fire, he was still shocked that slaves were now being trained to fight in battles, do chores, and even guard stores. However, something even more surprising caught his attention: their location. Earlier, Lyanna had told him that they were in Serval territory, south of the royal capital. She estimated that it would take them 2 days to reach the capital, which stood in the middle of the continent. Ray was too stunned to respond. When he was with Gunkinodongwa, they had entered the dungeon from the northern entrance in Lugardian territory. In other words, Ray had exited the dungeon on the complete opposite side, far across from the royal capital. This made him realize that the labyrinth was much larger than he had imagined. Back in the present, Lyanna shared her amazement at Ray's strength. She recalled watching high-ranking holy knights train in the royal capital as part of her own training. She had been instructed to learn by observing. While the knights were impressive, she felt they were far weaker than Ray. Their movements were nothing like his. In her opinion, even the strongest holy knights wouldn't be able to keep up with him. She had felt that way ever since she watched him fight on their journey. Lyanna called Ray amazing, and her words warmed his heart. As her bodyguard, he was happy to hear her praise. She quickly apologized, feeling it was bold of her to say such things, but Ray didn't mind at all. Suddenly, they heard a loud screech coming from the woods. Both of them became alert, wondering if it was a monster. Ray told Lyanna to stay at the camp. He believed the creature was stronger than the one he had fought earlier. After telling her to wait, he sprinted toward the woods. Meanwhile, Loki announced that they had finally arrived. The place was an A-ranked dungeon called the Dream Door of Death. He asked if everyone was ready, and they all confirmed. He reminded them that Gunkinodongwa had now reached S-rank, and with Kanata, their new white mage, they had nothing to fear. Then, he turned toward the dungeon and gave the order to begin the conquest. A few months ago, Loki entered Valand Castle in the royal capital and looked at the paintings on the walls. He remembered visiting the castle 5 or 6 years earlier when his party, Gunkinodongwa, had been promoted to A rank. Only a few people were allowed inside the castle, and most of them had to be royalty or had earned special awards. Every time Loki visited the castle, it reminded him of the past. Years ago, the king had talked about how gods were once human. He said they couldn't let demons do whatever they wanted, as it would ruin the way of life the gods created. The king ordered the hero to kill the demon lord. Since they were gods, it was the right thing to do. Loki had watched from the sidelines as the king sent the hero to defeat the demon lord. That was in the past. Now, in the present, Loki and others were kneeling before the king. The king already knew about Loki and Gunkinodongwa's success in conquering A-ranked dungeons and their help in improving the kingdom. Because of these achievements, the king rewarded Gunkinodongwa with a certificate that officially made them recognized as an S-ranked party. Aside from Gunkinodongwa, 3 other parties were promoted. However, only Gunkinodongwa reached S-rank. The other party leaders stared at Loki. He could feel their envious gazes, and though he tried to hide it, he couldn't stop himself from feeling proud. After his silent giggle, Loki thanked the king and promised to keep working hard to help the kingdom in defeating the demon lord. The king acknowledged his words and looked forward to their future achievements before dismissing the audience. Everyone in the throne room was then dismissed. As Loki walked through the hallways, pride filled him. Reaching S-rank had been a long journey. His party had cleared 8 C-rank dungeons and completed 5 missions to reach B rank. Then they conquered 4 B-rank dungeons and finished 5 more missions to advance to A rank. Finally, after defeating 2 A-rank dungeons and completing 3 missions, they had earned their S-rank status. Now that he was an S-rank adventurer, the guild's rewards would increase significantly. On top of that, the kingdom would provide financial support. At last, he could say goodbye to his money troubles. Loki stopped walking when someone noticed him. An old man called out to him saying it was amazing that he had become an S-ranked adventurer at just 20 years old. Loki thanked the old man for his kind words. The secretary agreed, saying Loki was indeed impressive. After all, many adventurers struggled to clear A-ranked dungeons. Loki flinched. This was the feeling he had always wanted. S-ranked adventurers were respected and praised by everyone. This was what made adventuring fun for him. His desire for approval was finally being fulfilled. Keeping a calm expression, Loki said it was all thanks to his talented party members. He claimed he was simply lucky to have such skilled teammates and that he owed his success to them. But deep down, he thought they were useless without his leadership. In his mind, they should be the ones thanking him instead. Realizing how strong Gunkin Odongwa was, the old man commented that they might soon fight alongside the hero, clearing S-ranked dungeons or even defeating the Demon Lord's generals. He patted Loki's shoulder and even suggested that Gunkin Odongwa alone could take down an undead terror. Loki felt disgusted and pushed the old man's hand away, saying he would do his best to defeat the monsters. Then he excused himself, using his teammates as an excuse. The old man apologized for holding him up and left as well. Loki found the old man annoying and couldn't believe he actually dreamed of defeating an undead terror. Loki didn't even want to run into one. These monsters were ranked A+ and came in 3 types: human type, beast type, and liquid type. Their bodies were covered in poison and they couldn't die unless their core was destroyed. Even 10 superior holy knights might struggle to defeat the weakest one, the human type. As for the liquid type, Gunkin Odongwa would be wiped out in 5 seconds. Their attack patterns were unpredictable, and their speed was unbelievably fast despite their appearance. Each type was as dangerous as a natural disaster. Even the hero himself couldn't defeat one alone. Loki left the castle and spotted his teammates. He remembered that the undead terror was a high-ranked monster found only in SSS-ranked dungeons like Yggdrasil. He was sure they wouldn't run into one in a million years. Gunkin Odongwa had been fighting a huge centipede monster inside the A-ranked dungeon, Dream Door of Death. Meanwhile, Loki called out to Himeno. The sword Saintess leaped above the monster, distracting it and pinning it to the ground. Suglin stepped forward and thanked Himeno before striking the monster with his greatsword, feeling proud of himself. However, Loki called him an idiot. Suddenly, something sharp shot out from the monster and injured Suglin's right shoulder. The monster tried to attack again, but a powerful magic blast struck it. The monster turned and glared at the attacker, File, who had fired the spell while protecting Kanata from the backlines. Loki praised File for the distraction and used his barrier magic to behead the monster. He then shrank the barrier around the severed head until it was crushed into pulp. After the centipede monster was defeated, Loki started scolding Suglinst, who was getting healed by Kanata. He complained that Suglinst shouldn't have just slashed at the monster randomly. He should have aimed for the head, just like Loki had explained before. Suglinst, annoyed by Loki's nagging, argued that it didn't matter since he had already defeated it. Seeing no point in arguing with someone who wouldn't listen, Loki gave up. Suglinst then turned his frustration toward Kanata, asking if she was finished yet. Kanata replied that she needed a little more time. Loki sighed, deciding to drop the issue. He announced that they would continue once Suglinst's arm was fully healed. He knew they had a long journey ahead, and wasting energy arguing with someone stubborn wasn't worth it. The A-ranked dungeon Dream of Door Death first appeared 3 years ago, when miners accidentally uncovered its entrance. 50 miners entered, hoping to find treasure and rare ores, but none of them ever returned. In response, Gunkin Odongwa was assigned to investigate and conquer the dungeon. Just then, Loki noticed File acting strangely. She started sweating as she spotted snowdrops. At first, Loki thought she was just talking about flowers, but File explained that snowdrops usually grew in snowy areas and only bloomed in places filled with strong magical energy. Hearing this, Loki suddenly realized something. Himeno then confirmed that a powerful monster was lurking inside the dungeon. She was certain of it. Her Sword Saint's blessing was reacting strongly. She even questioned whether this dungeon was really just A-ranked. Suglinst then asked if she was suggesting that an even stronger monster was inside. Loki recalled that Himeno's Sword Saint's blessing was an incredible skill. It could greatly boost a person's 5 senses, reflexes, and physical abilities for a limited time. More importantly, it also served as a warning when a foe stronger than the user was nearby. Kanata asked what they should do and said it would be dangerous if there really was a monster stronger than A-rank. Despite the concern, Loki decided to continue exploring. Worried, Suglinst asked if he was really sure. Loki found his question annoying and clicked his tongue. He reassured them that they would be fine since they had already defeated many dungeons and plenty of A-rank monsters. He also mentioned that this time they had Kanata, a skilled white mage. Kanata felt flattered but quickly pointed out that she was only ranked 20th among white mages, far below the top-ranked Rei. Hearing Ray's name, Loki was confused. He asked if Kanata was talking about their former teammate, the one they lost in Yggdrasil. Kanata confirmed that she meant Ray Din Huel, who used to be part of Gunkin Adongwa. Loki couldn't believe it. To him, Ray had always seemed like a useless weakling, and now he was supposed to be the #1 white mage? It sounded impossible. He didn't even know there were rankings for white mages in the first place. Kanata then admitted that she admired Ray's fighting style. Unlike others, he rarely used heal, yet he always kept his team alive. He had an incredible ability to read the battlefield instantly, analyze the enemy, and devise the best strategy. Loki scoffed, saying that everyone knew the real reason Ray barely used heal. Suglinst suddenly burst out laughing and added that Ray couldn't even cast heal properly, even if he wanted to. He had so little magic power that he couldn't even heal himself properly. Loki was glad there was someone foolish enough to say it out loud. The room fell silent. File's sharp glare made the others uneasy. Kanata, however, remained firm. She admitted she knew all of that, but she also knew something else. Ray always thought about how to protect his team without relying on magic power. He spent hours reading books and created his own unique fighting style. To her, he was an incredible white mage, the greatest of them all. Loki felt frustrated. Why was Kanata praising Ray so much? Kanata continued, saying that when it came to healing speed, no one could match Ray. His heal didn't just close wounds, it regenerated damaged tissues instantly. He could even reattach all 4 severed limbs in a blink. What Ray could do went far beyond normal healing. She explained that ordinary white mages could only speed up natural recovery, but they couldn't do anything beyond that. Hearing Kanata's words made Loki realize that from that moment on, no matter where they went, they wouldn't suffer fatal injuries. The only reason they had been promoted to S rank was pure luck. Without Ray, Gunkin Adongwa would have been the one to reach A rank. In fact, they would have died long ago. It wasn't just Loki who understood this, everyone else did too. Loki wasn't surprised that the others were speechless. They had already suspected that Ray's healing abilities weren't normal, and now everything was starting to make sense. He remembered the words of the white mages who had died along the way. One couldn't believe he was expected to act as bait while healing, saying it was impossible because healing magic required intense concentration. Another was shocked when his healing magic was called slow. He argued that healing a broken bone in an hour was actually fast. When the party asked for a second healing session, he thought it was ridiculous. Another white mage explained that the quality of healing magic depended on their understanding of human anatomy. If they didn't know exactly where the injury was or how to heal it properly, they could make it worse. A dying mage even mentioned that reattaching a torn arm was impossible. Now Loki understood that those white mages weren't bad at their jobs at all. He couldn't believe Ray had never told them about any of this. Himeno suddenly sensed something and warned everyone to hide. Loki quickly realized that a powerful monster was getting closer. Himeno then said it was the Dungeon Master. Loki was confused. Dungeon Masters were supposed to stay on the lowest floor, so why was it here? Himeno didn't know the reason, but her blessing was telling her to run. Based on the feeling she got, she believed the monster was S-ranked. Loki broke into a cold sweat. Suglinst asked what they should do after hearing that a monster as strong as those from Yggdrasil was coming. Loki took a deep breath and tried to stay calm. It had been 5 years since and they had grown much stronger. They weren't promoted to S-rank by luck alone. He believed they should fight since they were no longer weak. Everyone agreed, except for Feel. Just as they gained confidence, they froze. The monster appeared, dragging another monster's head behind it. It was a humanoid creature, an undead terror. To their shock, she even greeted them politely. Loki panicked. There was no way they could defeat a monster that even the hero and his party couldn't handle. Since they stayed silent, the undead terror asked if they didn't like talking. However, Loki noticed that she was a human-type monster. That gave him hope. If they defeated her, they could become even stronger, just like the hero's party. With that thought, they all attacked the undead terror together. Meanwhile, Ray moved through the forest. Suddenly he stopped. He could tell from the presence and smell alone. It was just as he feared. He had found one of the most troublesome monsters, a liquid-type undead terror. Ray then prepared to fight it. 3 years ago, File stood at the entrance of the SSS-ranked dungeon, Yggdrasil's Labyrinth. As she looked at it, she felt sad, thinking about Ray. Before they parted ways, Ray had given her a butterfly hair clip, saying it would look good on her. When File asked why he gave her the gift, Ray reminded her that it was her birthday. He also wanted to thank her. File didn't think she had done anything worth thanking, but Ray disagreed. He told her she had always saved him in battles and helped him with chores. He asked her to accept the gift. Even though she hesitated, she finally took the hair clip and promised to treasure it. But deep down, File believed Ray was wrong. She thought she was weak and could only do that much to help him. In her eyes, Ray was the real reason their party succeeded. He worked the hardest and supported everyone in ways no one else could. She had told Loki this many times, but he never took her seriously. Himeno doubted Ray's importance, saying he only gathered information and acted as bait. Loki believed it was natural for Ray to work the hardest since he was the weakest white mage, unable to use even a single healing spell. He claimed Ray lacked power and had to make up for it. Since Ray was part of their party, he had no choice but to put in extra effort. Otherwise, Loki said, he wouldn't be worth keeping around. At that moment, File realized that her words had no effect. No matter what she said, they wouldn't take her seriously. Understanding this, she stopped talking. Just then, someone mentioned that File had come back again. She panicked and noticed Norn sitting on a mound. Norn said she had seen File the other day and had been coming to the dungeon's entrance many times. She wondered if File was planning to conquer the dungeon. File asked who she was. Norn casually introduced herself as a girl who treated the dungeon like her garden. She then asked for File's name. When File tried to move, she suddenly froze, trapped by Norn's magic. Norn felt insulted, thinking File was ignoring her. She warned File that entering the dungeon with her current skills would mean certain death. To Norn's surprise, File broke free from the magic. Impressed, Norn quickly realized something after sensing File's magic power. She remembered File visiting the dungeon a few years ago. Assuming File already knew how dangerous it was, she asked why File kept coming back. File said she needed to come. Crying, she insisted that she had to find Ray. Norn assumed she was talking about the white-haired white mage. File froze in place. Norn then asked if she was Ray's friend. File tried to answer, but she couldn't find the right words. Through her tears, she believed that Ray wouldn't even consider her a friend anymore. However, Norn thought differently. She could see that File had been preparing to enter the dungeon, fully ready to risk her life. It was clear to her that File was willing to throw everything away just to find Ray. In Norn's eyes, that was proof enough that File was his friend. Even so, File insisted that giving up her life wouldn't bring Ray back. Norn was confused and told her not to assume that Ray was gone. She assured File that Ray was still alive. Shocked and unsure, File asked if that was really true. Norn confirmed it, saying Ray was actually doing well and had chosen to live inside the dungeon. She told File not to worry and advised her not to come anymore since powerful S-ranked monsters sometimes roamed the area. When she heard that Ray was alive, File broke down in tears. She dropped to her knees, sobbing in relief. Norn, seeing how much File cared for Ray, felt reassured. She was glad that Ray had someone who truly cared about him, and she was also happy to know that he had a place to return to. Once File calmed down, Norn agreed to leave a bag with supplies on floor 125 near the waterfall, so Ray could take it. She asked if File had a message for him. File simply said that the rucksack had originally belonged to Ray and doubted he would use anything she had prepared. Norn didn't fully understand her reasoning, but she agreed to do as she asked. File then thanked her. Norn remembered something and handed File a soul stone, a rare ore found only in Yggdrasil and worth a lot of money. Worried, File asked if it was really okay to accept such a valuable item. Norn then said there was a condition. File had to take care of Ray if he ever returned to the outside world. Without hesitation, File agreed. Norn thanked him and called him a cute ghost. This caught File off guard, but before he could say anything, Norn told him never to return to her dungeon again. That day, File learned that Ray was still alive. She felt a sense of relief, but it didn't change the fact that what she had done to Ray was unforgivable. She chose to carry that guilt forever. In the present, the human-like undead terror attacked Gunkinadongwa. File struggled because her magic power was weaker. Suglinst asked if she had any magic left. Forcing herself to speak, she claimed she could still use magic. However, the undead terror's attacks were too fast and she couldn't find a chance to fight back. Suddenly, the undead terror lashed out with her tentacles. Suglinst managed to block the attack, but File was hit hard and badly injured. As File collapsed to the ground, Suglinst cursed in frustration. Then he sensed something behind him. Turning around, he saw the undead terror glaring at him while flipping her body, revealing her thick thighs and curves. Without hesitation, she swung her tentacles and unleashed a powerful attack. Suglinst was sent flying and crashed to the floor, unconscious. The undead terror chuckled, letting out an ara ara, and mocked how weak adventurers were. Her attention then shifted to Loki, who was protecting Kanata. She smirked and declared they were next. Before she could attack, Himeno suddenly appeared behind her, attempting a sneak attack. But the undead terror was faster. Himeno froze in shock as she saw the creature transform one of her tentacles into a sharp blade. She barely had time to react before noticing her severed left hand lying on the ground. Blood gushed from the wound like a fountain. Himeno stared at it, confused, unable to process what had just happened. Then the pain hit her and she screamed in agony. The undead terror watched her suffering with delight. Loki trembled as he looked around. He insisted that things shouldn't have turned out this way. He saw File and Suglinst unconscious while Himeno cried in pain over her missing hand. Kanata warned him about what was in front of him. Loki quickly put up a barrier he was proud of, but the undead terror's sharp tentacles pierced through it with ease. The attack didn't stop there. It sliced off Loki's arm and even took his left leg. He screamed in agony while Kanata stood and watched. Desperate, Loki shouted at Kanata, demanding to know what she was doing. He ordered her to hurry up and heal him, calling her a slowpoke in frustration. The undead terror stopped in front of Loki. Panicked, he begged it to wait and asked if they could communicate. He apologized and pleaded for mercy, but the creature didn't listen. Its sharp tentacles wiggled toward him, ready to strike. Terrified, Loki shouted that he couldn't die yet and begged to be spared. He even told the undead terror to go after the others instead. Both Kanata and Himeno were shocked by his words. The undead terror sighed and called Loki's screams filthy, saying she couldn't stand listening to them. In a final act of desperation, Loki grabbed Kanata, pulling her in front of him as a shield against the deadly attack. Feel shouted a powerful fire magic attack called Giga Flame. The undead terror was hit, saving Kanata from death. Kanata was surprised to see that Feel had gotten back up. Feel then told Kanata to use the chance to heal the others while she distracted the undead terror. Loki noticed Feel standing, but he himself collapsed, unconscious. The undead terror shifted her attention to Feel. She remarked that Feel's scream would probably sound beautiful. Feel knew she had to at least help Kanata escape. She realized this was her punishment for abandoning her friend. The undead terror then sent all her tentacles forward, piercing Feel's body. As pain filled her, Feel wondered if Ray would be happy seeing his backstabbing teammates dying. Her staff slipped from her hands and fell to the ground. She hoped Ray would, but the thought trailed off. More than anything, she feared dying. That day, she couldn't stop herself from abandoning Ray. There were so many people who hated witches with demon's blood like her. They wouldn't hesitate to leave someone like her behind. She hadn't been able to say anything back then, afraid everyone would cast her aside instead. Her fear of death had been stronger than her desire to save Ray. It had made her selfish. Now she accepted this as her punishment. As her butterfly hair clip fell to the ground, she imagined Ray's smiling face one last time. Soon after, Loki opened his eyes and asked where he was. He recalled fighting the undead terror. He also noticed and could feel his right arm and left leg gone. A woman appeared and looked happy to see him awake. Loki asked how she was. She introduced herself as the head of the medical clinic. Noticing Loki's reaction, she assumed the painkillers and magic were working well. Realizing she was in charge, Loki demanded that she heal his arm and leg. Since she was the head of the clinic, he believed she could do it. He even offered to pay any amount because he couldn't afford to stay like this. However, the woman told him she couldn't heal his limbs, but she knew someone who could. Loki's face lit up with hope, but then she revealed that the only person capable of doing it was Ray, the very person Loki had killed. Loki froze in shock, struggling to find his words. He asked again if Ray was the only one who could help. Then in denial, he insisted that he hadn't killed Ray. He reminded her that he was the leader of Gunkin Odongwa, recognized by the king. He declared that killing a comrade was a serious crime. The head of the medical clinic brought up 5 people. Over the past 5 years, several white mages in Loki's party had died, which seemed strange. She pointed out that white mages had the lowest risk of dying, yet many from Loki's group had lost their lives. However, after reading Kanata's report, everything made sense. She had heard that Loki used Kanata as a shield when he was about to be killed. Kanata, flustered, tried to explain. The medical head also heard that Loki had sold his friends to monsters. Loki tried to defend himself, but she cut him off, saying she was already angry that her dear friends had died because of him. She made it clear that he wouldn't escape the consequences. Loki couldn't even respond. The medical head sighs and tells Loki that his career as an adventurer is over. When Loki asks what she means, she mentions his comrades. Loki is confused and unsure of what has happened to them. She then revealed the grim truth. Suglunst was in a coma. Himeno had lost her sight along with her left arm and leg. File had gone missing and they assumed she was dead. The group Loki had once been so proud of was completely destroyed. Loki's face froze in shock. He couldn't believe what he had just heard. All he could manage was a confused, weak, "Eh?" In the forest where Ray had been, trees lay shattered as tentacles whipped through the air. But in the midst of the chaos, a sharp slash cut through them. Somehow, with just a single knife, Ray was overpowering the liquid-type undead terror. Suddenly, eerie voices came from the creature asking Ray to play with it. He narrowed his eyes, noticing how the severed tentacles instantly regenerated as if nothing had happened. No matter how much he cut, the creature kept restoring itself, showing no signs of running out of magic power. This made Ray wonder just how many humans the undead terror had consumed to reach such a state. The monster attacked again, destroying everything in its path. Ray dodged swiftly, slicing the tentacles apart like sashimi, but as he fought, he questioned why such a powerful monster was roaming the forest. While avoiding another strike, he remembered that the undead terror was known as the Reciter of the Dead, a high-tier monster typically found near the Demon Lord's castle. It wasn't a creature he should have encountered here. Then he recalled how the monster had been releasing an unnecessary amount of magic power, as if trying to draw attention. Was it luring him in, testing him, or worse, was someone using it to test him? If that was the case, the one behind it had to be powerful enough to control an undead terror, possibly a high-ranking demon or something just as dangerous. Ray assumed that whoever it was had been watching him from somewhere nearby. The undead terror attacked again, but Ray effortlessly avoided each strike. He realized he couldn't afford to drag out the fight. He had no way of tracking the observer, and besides, Lyanna was waiting for him. However, the creature in front of him was an S-ranked monster. He couldn't reveal too much about his abilities, but he needed to end the battle quickly. With that in mind, Ray decided to get serious. A terrifying aura erupted from him as he prepared to finish the fight. After a few seconds of standing still, Ray vanished and reappeared above the undead terror. The monster tried to defend itself by striking with its deadly tentacles, but Ray quickly sliced through them as they reached for him. He dodged a larger one, which ended up smashing into a tree instead. Seeing an opening, Ray aimed for the monster's body and struck with great force, splitting it apart. As he looked inside, he spotted its weak point, the core. Before he could attack, the monster fought back, forcing Ray to retreat. But now that he knew where to strike, he was ready to end the battle. Ray channeled his magic into his knife, transforming it into a weapon that resembled a lance. This technique was called Aura Lance Ray. As the monster launched all its tentacles at him in one last attempt to fight back, Ray spun his body to build momentum and unleashed his Aura Lance Ray. The powerful attack completely destroyed the monster, leaving nothing behind. After the fight, Ray picked up the cracked core of the undead terror. He thought about using it to make a weapon, but he could also sell it for a high price. For now, he decided to keep it. Just then, he noticed Lyanna watching from the bushes. She was shocked that Ray had defeated the undead terror so easily and quickly. She started calling him amazing because he had destroyed the core in a single strike. On top of that, he had dodged the monster's fast tentacle attacks. Ray simply said he had fought undead terrors before. These monsters also appeared in the middle floors of Yggdrasil Labyrinth. He admitted they were strong, but the ones in the lower floors were even stronger. Since the danger had passed, Ray suggested resting for the night and leaving early in the morning. Lyanna agreed and headed back to the camp first. As Ray looked around, he felt like something was off. Lyanna asked what was wrong, but he just said it was nothing and turned his attention back to the monster's core. Changing the subject, he asked Lyanna if she liked sweet food, and if she wanted to eat some together once they reached the royal capital. Lyanna said she did. Ray then decided to sell the monster's core and treat themselves to some desserts. He admitted that he also liked sweet food and even knew a good place in the capital. Hearing this, Lyanna shyly agreed to go. Ray was happy with her answer and told her to look forward to it. As the sun set the next day, Ray decided to stop and set up camp. But before he could, Lyanna called out to him loudly. Ray wondered if she had spotted monsters, but instead, she excitedly announced that she had found a village nearby. They soon arrived at the village, which was surrounded by high walls. It was clear that it was indeed a village. Overcome with relief, Lyanna's legs gave out and she sank to the ground. Ray asked if she was okay, and she explained that she had just lost her strength for a moment. Ray understood. After all, they had been walking non-stop since morning. On top of that, they had gotten lost, which made their journey even longer. Looking up at the towering walls, Lyanna hesitated and commented that it seemed more like a fortress than a village. Ray explained that the walls were likely built using stones infused with divine power to protect the villagers. In the past, monster attacks had caused many casualties, so people started building walls around villages and towns for safety. They stopped in front of the gate, the only way in or out. Feeling responsible, Lyanna stepped forward, ready to ask the people inside for permission to enter. But before she could get too close, Ray quickly stopped her. Confused, Lyanna asked what was wrong. Ray explained that just like the walls, the gate was also made with divine power. It was designed to reject anyone with magic powers, just like it did with monsters and demons. To prove his point, Ray pressed his palm against the gate. Immediately, a burning sensation spread across his hand, showing that the divine power also affected humans with magic abilities. Lyanna froze as she realized her mistake and quickly apologized. She knew the gate would reject monsters and demons, but hadn't expected it to have the same effect on humans. Ray reassured her, saying it made sense that she wouldn't know since this was her first time seeing a divine gate. Ray shifted his gaze to the divine gate, which suddenly displayed a projection of a huge eye. The divine gate's eye was analyzing them. Ray explained that it was a spell used to check for any presence beyond the gate. Moments later, the gate opened and Ray assumed they were being welcomed inside. Before they could step forward, someone appeared in front of them, pointing a spear at them. Lyanna panicked, but Ray remained calm and simply glared at the guard. The guard stared at them for a while but quickly lowered his spear after realizing they were humans. He then closed the divine gate and explained that he had sensed a strong magic reaction, making him think they were demons disguised as travelers. The guard introduced himself as Atra, a diamond-ranked holy knight and the divine tree keeper of the village's divine gate. Ray was surprised that someone so young held such an important role. Atra laughed and said he just got lucky since he was still inexperienced. However, Ray wasn't so sure. He knew that only those skilled in controlling divine power could activate the powerful divine gate. Based on Atra's movements earlier, Ray could tell that he was strong despite his age. Atra apologized for the rough welcome. He wanted to treat them to a meal, but since all the restaurants were closed, he could only offer some water. However, he recommended a good inn where they could get a discount. Ray thanked him and then introduced himself and Lyanna. He apologized for arriving so late and explained that they had gotten lost in the forest. Atra was shocked to hear that and called them lucky for surviving. Ray just laughed it off. Atra decided to share some important news. He revealed that the village had been in danger for several months because a wicked demon had been targeting them. He then asked Ray if he had ever heard of a werewolf, a demon that was both human and wolf. Atra explained that the villagers had been attacked by werewolves for months. Ray said they hadn't encountered one on their way to the village. Atra believed him since they were still alive. Ray then asked if the werewolf was strong. Atra confirmed that they were ranked C, and if the country had known about them, they would have sent a unit of holy knights. Ray wondered if even the holy knights couldn't defeat the werewolves. Atra was surprised by how quickly Ray caught on and admitted that 4 diamond-ranked holy knights had been sent, but all of them had been killed. Ray was shocked to hear this. Atra then revealed something even more terrifying. There weren't just 1 or 2 werewolves, there were 3. Because of this, the village had been completely cut off. No one could leave to ask for help, and they were running out of food. The 4 holy knights who were sent never returned, and while Atra expected more to be dispatched, he wasn't sure when, or if, that would happen. Lyanna looked at Ray with concern, but Atra had even more grim news. He didn't want to believe it, but people had been disappearing from the village one after another. It started at the same time the werewolves appeared. At first he assumed it was their doing, but there were no traces of struggle, no footprints, no signs of an attack, and no one had ever heard a scream. The village chief and the others believed it wasn't related to the werewolves, but Ray could tell Atra thought otherwise. Atra then suggested that someone in the village might be a spy, secretly working with the werewolves. Meanwhile, outside the village, 3 werewolves were resting in the nearby woods. They wondered if the white-haired man who had just arrived was really the one who had defeated Vegan. They turned to a hooded man named Alfurk, one of the 4 deadly demons. Alfurk simply smiled creepily. Ray thought about the 2 incidents, the werewolves and the missing villagers. Atra apologized for sharing too much information as soon as they arrived. Just then, 2 siblings, Shu and Liz, showed up and called out to Atra. They had brought him dinner and he thanked them. Ray asked if they were his children, but Atra explained that they were the innkeeper's kids. The lively siblings introduced themselves and then asked for Ray's and Lyanna's names. Ray and Lyanna greeted them in return. Atra explained that he had to stay at his post, which was why the kids were the ones bringing his meals. Ray praised them for being responsible, and they smiled brightly. Atra then asked Shu and Liz to guide Ray and Lyanna to their inn, saying their mother would be happy to have guests after a long time. The kids asked if that was true, and Atra assured them it was. Excited, the children took Lyanna's hands and eagerly offered to lead the way. Ray smiled at Lyanna. Atra then reminded Ray about the inn he had planned to recommend, saying it was the same one the kids' mother managed. He mentioned that it was affordable and had a large bath. Ray saw no reason to refuse and decided to stay there for the night. As night fell over the village, Ray, Lyanna, and the kids finally arrived at the inn. Shu and Liz called for their mother, telling her they had customers. Their mother, Shinoka, was startled and rushed out of the kitchen. She greeted the visitors and introduced herself. Ray apologized for arriving so late, but Shinoka didn't mind. With fewer customers coming by lately, she was grateful for their visit. However, she was surprised that they had made it to the village safely, given the dangers outside the walls. Ray guessed she was talking about werewolves, and mentioned that they hadn't seen any on their way. Shinoka was amazed by their luck. She explained that when the village men went out to find help, none of them ever returned. The werewolves, she said, were demons with an incredible sense of smell. She told them they were lucky to have gotten past them unharmed. Ray wondered if that was true. From what he had heard so far, he realized that the werewolves had surrounded the village. If they really had a strong sense of smell, they would have attacked already. Besides, Ray himself had a sharp sense of smell, but he hadn't noticed any demon scent on the way to the village. He wondered if the werewolves had just been away for a while. Shinoka apologized for delaying them and offered to take them to their room. As she was about to lead them to the 2nd floor, Ray stopped her and asked for one more thing. He wanted details about the recent events and the number of casualties in the village over the past few months. He needed more information. Later in their room, Lyanna summarized everything they had learned from Shinoka. The werewolves first appeared near the village about 3 months ago. The first victim was a woman who went hunting outside the village but never returned. The next day, her head was found in front of the divine gate, half-eaten like an apple. Everyone believed that the rest of her body had been devoured. After that, the village men formed a group to hunt the werewolves, but they were all killed. A few days later, Atra mentioned that holy knights were sent to defeat the werewolves, but they were also wiped out. Another group of men left the village to seek help, but they never returned either. At the same time, people in the village started disappearing without a trace. So far, 28 villagers had vanished, and all of them were men. Lyanna found it hard to believe since the Divine Gate was supposed to protect the village. There was no sign that the werewolves had entered, yet people kept disappearing. Ray then explained that this was why Atra suspected there was a spy in the village. Since both events started at the same time, Ray doubted they were unrelated. When Lyanna asked if Ray also believed in the spy, Ray could only guess that it was either a werewolf in disguise or a demon. Shinoka knocked on the door and walked in. She told them that dinner was ready. A simple meal was served, and Ray and Lyanna glanced at each other. Ray mentioned that they had heard about the village's food shortage and asked Shinoka if it was really okay to serve them so much. Shinoka admitted that the village was indeed struggling with food, but Ray and Lyanna were their first customers in months. She assured them not to worry and to eat as much as they wanted. Ray apologized and thanked her, and Lyanna did the same. As they were about to eat, Ray noticed Liz and Shu staring at them, their mouths watering. Their stomachs growled, and they quickly apologized. Ray asked if they had eaten yet. The two nodded and said they had only eaten a piece of bread. Ray was surprised, and they explained that they weren't allowed to eat much. Ray then invited them over and offered them his share of the food. Liz and Shu hesitated, asking if he was sure. Ray assured them that he wasn't very hungry, but in return, he wanted them to promise something. They asked what it was. Ray told them to share the food equally between them. Their faces lit up, and they eagerly agreed. Shinoka walked over, ready to scold her kids for bothering the customers, but she stopped when she saw them eating Ray's food. Ray quickly explained that he had given them his share. Shinoka offered to deduct the meal from their payment, but Ray insisted on paying the full amount. Worried, Shinoka asked if he was really okay with that. Ray reassured her, and she apologized before thanking him. Just then, Ray suddenly remembered something. He remembered that Atra, the divine tree keeper, was close to Shinoka's children. Shinoka had shared that Atra often played with them and had grown attached. She was grateful to him. Ray mentioned that Atra would be thankful as well since the children had been bringing him food. Lyanna smiled when she saw Liz's cheerful expression. Shinoka then revealed that Atra once had a family who lived in another town, but they were all killed by demons. She had heard that Atra's children were around the same age as Liz and Shu. Ray suddenly realized that Atra had also lost loved ones. Shinoka explained that Atra had known about the danger approaching his family's home. However, he believed the Divine Gate would not remain active if he left, so he chose to stay in the village to protect the people. Shinoka said that everyone was grateful to him. Ray finally understood why Atra was so close to Liz and Shu. Even after losing his family, he continued to fight. Now, as the Divine Tree Keeper, he was protecting the village. Ray couldn't imagine the heavy burden Atra carried. After the meal, Ray planned to take a bath and get ready for bed. He had wanted a separate room, but Lyanna refused, so they ended up sharing the same one. Ray knew it might be a problem since he was a man, so he mentioned it to her. In the end, he chose to sleep on the floor while letting Lyanna have the bed. A moment later, Lyanna entered the room looking down for some reason. Ray asked if something was wrong or if she had an upset stomach. Lyanna said the food was delicious, but it seemed like something else was on her mind. She remembered how Ray shared his food with the kids and said that it should have been hers that was given away. However, she had eaten her full meal. Ray assured her it was fine. He knew how hungry she was and didn't want her to collapse from starvation. Lyanna kept apologizing. Ray told her not to apologize. He explained that he just didn't feel hungry because his body was used to it. He also reminded her that he had been a slave as a child. Back then, he was never given food and was always starving. However, there was one person who always helped him. Nenemoa, who was also a slave, would share her food with him. She always said that boys needed to eat a lot so they could grow. Even when she was hungry herself, she still gave him her food. Now, Ray wanted to do the same. This made Lyanna realize that Ray was truly a good person, but Ray wasn't sure if he was. Lyanna then told him that the kindness he had shown to the children was something they would never forget. To her, his actions were truly wonderful. Ray looked at Lyanna and realized she cared too much about what others thought of her. She always paid close attention but rarely spoke without thinking, as if she was afraid of something. When she did speak, she only said good things about others. It didn't seem right for someone so young to act that way. At that moment, Ray fully understood. Lyanna had been raised as a slave. It was just his assumption, but he believed she had been treated as a luxury slave. She must have gone through many hardships on her own. He could tell she carried a deep wound, one she hid to protect herself from more pain. Ray saw his past self in her. She still had the slave mark, but she had no real restraints anymore. She was just a 12-year-old girl. He wanted her to live freely. He wanted to break the invisible chains holding her back. In a serious tone, Ray told Lyanna that even though they had made a contract, he was not her master. Lyanna, stumbling over her words, simply agreed. Ray reassured her not to be afraid and gently patted her head. He hoped that one day she would find her own path. Not as a slave, but as someone who lived for herself. Until then, he decided to protect her. Later, Ray went to take a bath and found it quite relaxing. He noted that the place would have been crowded if not for the werewolf incident. As he enjoyed the warm water, Lyanna suddenly entered, covering her front with a towel. Seeing her like that, Ray turned red with shock. Ray stuttered as he asked Lyanna why she was in the bath. He told her that she should have at least informed him if she wanted to go in first. Lyanna looked down while Ray stood up. Then he suddenly realized he was completely exposed and quickly went back into the water. He wondered why this situation was even happening. Lyanna then explained that she came because she wanted to help him wash his body. Ray immediately told her there was no need and reminded her that he wasn't her master. She didn't have to do this. However, Lyanna was worried. Ray had been helping her so much, but she hadn't done anything for him in return. She asked him to at least let her do what she could. Ray froze for a moment because he understood Lyanna's feelings all too well. In the past, he had also worried about not being needed by others. That fear had pushed him to do everything he could to make himself useful. Understanding her feelings, he decided to ease her worries and accept her help for now. He then asked her to wash his back, and Lyanna was relieved. Excited, Lyanna ran toward him, promising to clean him properly. Leaning closer, she eagerly said she was good at cleaning. Then she called him over, but Ray hesitated and asked if he could get a towel first. While Lyanna washed Ray's back, she asked if it hurt. Ray said it felt just right, which made Lyanna happy. Ray noticed her cheerful expression and felt glad as well. Suddenly, Lyanna asked him a question. She wanted to know if he could defeat the werewolves. Ray replied that it should be easier than fighting the undead terror from the other day. However, handling all three at once would be troublesome. He explained that werewolves were fast demons. In terms of speed, they were quicker than the undead terror, even faster than Vegan. If they managed to escape, they would call for reinforcements, and that would be the real challenge. Lyanna had another concern, the recent disappearances. Ray agreed that it was strange, but then explained that werewolves usually lived in the demon realm, far from human territory. He added that aside from dungeons, the demon realm, where demons and the demon lord lived, was surrounded by large-scale barriers. Because of that, werewolves shouldn't be able to reach human territory. Lyanna then pointed out that the demons had entered human lands without passing through the barrier. Ray was shocked and asked if that was really true since he had never heard of such a thing. His surprise made him glance at Lyanna, but after seeing her, he quickly turned his head forward again. They knew that two types of demons existed in human territory. The first type was those born in their land, and the second was those that came from dungeons. Werewolves were a type of demon that could only enter human lands through a dungeon. Ray concluded that a dungeon must exist, connecting the human and demon realms. Lyanna agreed, explaining that 3 years ago, an SS-ranked adventurer party found an entrance to the demon realm. They went inside and returned with proof. That was how people learned about the route. However, the government never revealed which dungeon it was. Ray now understood why the undead terror appeared in human territory. He assumed it had used that route. If that were the case, many other dangerous monsters could also enter human lands. Ray thanked Lyanna for the information, but suddenly realized she was pressed closely against him, skin to skin. He could feel the soft, unripe fruits on his back. He mentioned it to Lyanna, and she quickly apologized, saying she had finished washing his back. She then offered to wash his front, but Ray refused. After the bath, an old man named Oki apologized for visiting so late at night. He introduced himself as the village chief. Ray didn't mind the visit and asked if he was there because of the werewolves. Oki confirmed that the village was being attacked by them. The knights who came to protect them had been killed. Their food supply was running low, and the people were struggling to survive. The fort with the divine gate was the only thing keeping them safe. But he knew it was only a matter of time before the village was destroyed. Oki had a favor to ask. He wanted Ray to inform the outside world about the village's situation. If possible, he also wanted him to notify the knights in the royal capital. Of course, this would only be when they left the village, so he asked if Ray was willing to do it. Ray understood the old man's request. He explained that they had originally been on their way to the royal capital and promised to inform the authorities about the village and submit a formal request for help. Oki thanked him, saying that Ray was their only hope. Oki then apologized for rushing him, but said that Atra had an important message. When Ray asked what it was, Atra told them they should leave the village as soon as possible that night. He didn't sense any werewolves nearby, so it would be safer to leave then. However, the old man was still worried because people had only been disappearing at night. Ray said he had already heard about the disappearances from Atra and Shinoka. Oki assumed that meant Ray also knew the missing villagers were all men. However, no one knew why only men were disappearing. Since Ray was also a man, Oki warned him that staying in the village would be dangerous. Even so, leaving was just as risky because of the werewolves outside. Lyanna was worried and asked what they should do. Ray thought about the two incidents and what he could do at that moment. He apologized to Lyanna, who had been looking forward to resting, and said he wanted to leave right away. Lyanna was surprised but said she was fine with it since she would follow Ray anywhere. Liz asked if they were really leaving already. Shinoka then told the kids to stay in their room. Shu wanted to play with Ray and Lyanna, but Ray apologized and promised to visit the village again when the time was right. Shu and Liz made Ray and Lyanna promise to come back. Feeling sad, Lyanna simply said yes. While Shinoka was scolding the kids, Ray walked over to Oki. He said he had one thing to ask him. Oki asked what it was. Near the Divine Gate, Atra called out to Ray and Lyanna and apologized for the short notice. Ray said it was fine. He mentioned that going outside at midnight was dangerous, but if they missed this chance, they might never be able to leave the village. He sincerely apologized, but Ray told him not to. Ray then asked if it was true that Atra couldn't sense the presence of the werewolves. Atra sadly confirmed it. After hearing from Ray and Lyanna that they weren't attacked on the way, Atra checked the area with divine power. He assumed the werewolves were gone for some reason. Ray understood. Atra then said this might be their only chance to escape the village. Ray and Lyanna thanked him for his kindness. Atra told them not to worry about it and apologized again for the sudden decision. He explained that if they left now, they would be past the werewolves' territory within an hour. It was still dangerous, but he hoped they would reach the royal capital safely. He also asked them to inform the knights once they arrived. Ray agreed. The Divine Gate opened and Ray and Lyanna left. Atra waved goodbye. After seeing Ray and Lyanna leave, the werewolves finally appeared on the nearby cliff. They were relieved that the obstacle was gone and could now continue tormenting the villagers before eating them. One of the werewolves said it would be boring to just eat them right away. It was more enjoyable to hear their screams first. However, they still couldn't believe that Vegan had lost to Ray. No matter how they thought about it, Ray seemed like nothing more than an ordinary traveler. Even so, they had been ordered by Alfurk to leave them alone. One of the werewolves, however, had his eyes on Ray and Lyanna. He didn't care much about Ray, but Lyanna looked like a high-quality meal to him. He could sense the magic power flowing through her. Another werewolf warned him not to get carried away, reminding him that if they caused too much trouble, the knights might come. They had already heard that a group of knights had started patrolling the villages and towns on their own. It was only a matter of time before they reached this village too. Before that happened, the werewolves planned to feast on all the villagers. One of them agreed with the plan but complained about how troublesome it had been to kidnap and eat people in secret. Now it was finally time to devour all the humans freely. One of them had already picked out a pair of children to eat later, while another agreed that children were especially delicious. They talked about how they had already taken care of the troublesome men just for this moment. The only man left in the village was a weak old man, and the rest were nothing but helpless women and children. With their decision made, the werewolves eagerly headed toward the village, ready to begin their feast. Later, the women in the village couldn't believe what they were seeing. A werewolf stood next to Atra, who was unconscious. They called out to him, but he didn't respond. He lay in a pool of his own blood. The werewolf raised its claws, and the women screamed as they ran away in fear. One of them shouted as loud as she could, warning the others that the werewolves had arrived, but one of the werewolves told her she was too late. Another werewolf went to Shinoka's inn. It reminded the villagers that there was only one way in and out, meaning they had nowhere to escape. The werewolves hunted down those who ran and even those who tried to hide. To them, the village was no longer a home, it was now a prison, a cage for everyone inside. Shinoka tried to fight back with a kitchen knife, but the werewolf easily grabbed her arm. He couldn't believe she thought such a small weapon could stop him. Annoyed, he slammed her to the ground, grumbling about how he had wanted to eat her first. Then, a new idea came to him. He planned to go after Shinoka's children first, making sure she heard their screams. He was certain their cries would make her even more terrified. Realizing the danger, Shinoka turned toward the kitchen and told Shu and Liz to run. The werewolf assumed that was the direction they had gone. Deciding to change his plan, he chose to eat Shinoka first before moving on to his real prey. However, a knife suddenly stabbed him from below, forcing his mouth shut. He screamed in pain, confused about why a knife was stuck in him. Ray said the werewolf's scream was unbearable. Then he grabbed the knife and told the werewolf to be quiet. Blood dripped onto the floor as Ray apologized to Shinoka for being late. The werewolf, confused, wondered why Ray was back in the village after already leaving. Frustrated, he cursed at Ray for tearing his mouth apart. Ray simply said he had returned to discipline some ill-mannered dogs. Angered, the werewolf lunged forward for a quick attack, but Ray easily stepped aside. Shocked, the werewolf couldn't believe how fast Ray had dodged. Then he suddenly noticed his left arm on the ground, blood pouring from the severed limb. The sight distracted him, and before he could react, Ray delivered a powerful heel kick to his face, sending him crashing into a nearby wall. As the dust settled, Ray looked around and realized the werewolf was gone. The broken windows made it clear the demon had escaped. Wounded and in pain, the werewolf stumbled away, trying to flee. His mind raced as he questioned what kind of person Ray was. At first he thought Ray might be a holy knight, but he felt no divine power from him. Still, Ray's speed was inhuman. The werewolf hadn't even seen the attack coming. If he continued fighting, he knew he would be killed. He had to escape. He had to report this to his captain at the village gate. But as he reached the entrance, his heart sank. His captain lay cold on the ground, missing his left arm, just like him. Horror filled his voice as he screamed his captain's name. He was sure this was also Ray's doing. Then he heard something behind him. Turning around, he saw Ray walking toward him. The werewolf was stunned. How had Ray caught up so fast? But then, his eyes widened as he noticed Ray holding something. Ray asked if the werewolf still couldn't tell. Then he pulled out another dead werewolf, claiming it was his friend. The werewolf was shocked to see his own brother had also been killed. He assumed Ray had set them up, but he couldn't end things like this. Suddenly, Ray appeared in front of him and apologized. He said he couldn't let him escape, so he decided to cut off his legs. The werewolf didn't expect this, but he accepted his fate. Ray then chained up the werewolves. He was relieved that no villagers had died. Thanks to Lyanna, most of them had been evacuated in time. Now the only thing left was to find the demon's collaborator. The villagers approached Ray and thanked him for saving them. Ray was just glad they were safe. He had kept the werewolves alive so they could testify. Then his younger self appeared and questioned his decision. His younger self asked why he didn't just kill the demons. He argued that keeping the werewolves alive was pointless since Ray already knew who the spy was. He reminded Ray that it was just like his fight with Vegan. He had the chance to kill him, but chose not to. He warned that these half-hearted actions would only lead to regret. Ray couldn't believe that a shadow of his past was appearing before him again. The village chief came out from the bushes and asked Ray how he knew the werewolves were going to attack. Ray told him to ask the divine tree keeper, who had been pretending to be dead. The villagers were shocked by this. Then Atra started moving and complained that things should have gone smoothly. Just as Ray had suspected, Atra was working with the werewolves. Atra stood up and glared at everyone. The villagers couldn't believe what they had just heard. Someone then stepped forward, clearly upset by what she just heard. Shinoka had just arrived and couldn't believe that Atra had been working with the werewolves. Everyone saw Atra as their protector, so the betrayal was shocking. The old man then spoke up, saying that Ray had told him something before leaving the village some time ago. Ray had warned him that Atra was a spy, letting the werewolves inside. At first, the old man refused to believe it, but while hiding, he saw it with his own eyes. Now he was certain Atra was the traitor. Atra then called out to Ray, demanding to know how he figured it out. Ray admitted that he had a slightly better sense of smell. He could detect the scent of werewolves on Atra's clothes. He also knew that a group of werewolves wasn't weak, yet Atra had managed to defeat them too easily. That didn't make sense, unless Atra was working with them. Ray had also noticed a faint scent of werewolves inside the village. It was clear they were behind the disappearances, but for the werewolves to get past the divine gate, they needed the help of the divine tree keeper. That's when Ray realized Atra had lied multiple times. When Atra had seen them off, he claimed to have checked the surroundings using divine power. But only the great saint from the royal capital could use that technique, and that wasn't the only lie. Atra laughed and said he couldn't believe Ray figured it out just by scent. He even joked that maybe Ray was the real werewolf. But in the end, it didn't matter. Things were getting complicated, so Atra decided to kill everyone in the village, including Ray. Ray stayed calm and asked why Atra was working with the werewolves. Atra gave only one reason: to survive. He reminded Ray how powerful the werewolves were, strong enough to defeat even the holy knights. That's why he made a deal with them. But Ray could tell Atra was lying just by watching his eyes. Still, he asked what kind of deal he made. Atra explained that in exchange for giving the werewolves food, the villagers, they agreed to let him live. Ray then asked if that was why he opened the divine gate and allowed them into the village. Atra confirmed it, and after hearing his words, Shinoka collapsed to her knees, crying. Those things didn't matter to Atra anymore because he planned to kill everyone there, which would put an end to everything. He believed his rank would rise if he killed the person who had defeated the werewolves. As long as he got promoted, he wouldn't have to stay in a village that was treated like a trash heap stuck with a dull job. With the village destroyed, there wouldn't be a need for a divine tree keeper in the area either. Ray then asked Atra why he became a holy knight. He remembered that to become one, a person had to accept divine power. If the power didn't merge well, there was a chance they could die. Only those who survived this dangerous trial could become holy knights. Atra confirmed this was true. Ray then pointed out that when someone was willing to risk their life, it was usually for money or for someone important to them. He reminded Atra that he had gone through such a deadly trial and hinted that he must have had someone important to him. Atra shouted that Ray was right. He had gained the power to protect the people who mattered to him. He then asked Ray if he had ever heard the story of his family. Ray gave a silent nod. Ray said he understood how Atra felt and told him that revenge had no meaning. He asked Atra to stop, but Atra finally lost control. He shouted that someone like Ray wouldn't understand. Everything had been taken from him, and he hadn't been able to do anything about it. He said it was too late. Far too late. No matter what Ray said, his family would never come back. They had been his whole world. And because of that, he had decided to unleash his anger on the village, killing everyone, even the people of the entire country. Ray realized that Atra had no intention of stopping. Both of them took their stances, ready to fight. Ray knew that Atra needed someone to put an end to this. The two clashed in the end, a healer's knife against a holy knight's spear. That is the end of the recap at chapter 11.2. Please read the pinned comment about the next part.